there, Darren. How are you doing?
Yeah, very well, thank you. Really looking forward to today. It's such an interesting topic.
Yes, another important topic, and we decided we wanted to talk about something that, at the first glance, it seems like everybody knows about, everybody's heard about, but we know that it runs very deep, this topic, and it's about polarities, isn't it? Duality. And so we want to get into that. Before we do, please, if you're watching, subscribe. The two S's, share and subscribe. And check out the Ruby Mountain website also, www.rubymountain.org. And that's it. That's the advertising bit finished.
Yeah, let's go.
So, yeah, this subject I know is a passion for us both, because it's one of those never-ending researches, isn't it?
And I think that's exactly the thing. It's easy to have an idea about it and a few examples, and yin-yang and day and night, and it's sort of in people's minds these days. But how deep that actually goes, and one of the things you mentioned was, well, how does it affect our lives? Because that's where it gets really amazing. It saturates everything in our lives and outside of our lives, and we really want to go through some examples and to explore that a bit deeper, because we not only think it's important, but after many years of experience, it really is a powerful tool to change one's life as one wants to change it. It's really vital to understand. So yeah, I think this is a really great topic.
Yeah, and the wonderful thing about this subject is, once you get the idea of it, you can learn and study and use it as a kind of tool for personal understanding, personal growth for the rest of your life. You can look at everything through the eyes of understanding there's a duality in here somewhere. Some things are more obvious, some things are less obvious, but some things are really essential in terms of psychology, emotions, personal inner balances, because it's all about balance and harmony and the right kind of growth, right? Something growing not out of balance, but growing in harmony. So you think, again, we often say this in our conversations, but again, you feel like, why didn't we study this in school? Why didn't we all go out in the backyard and look at a flower and look at the two forms that you find in nature, straight lines and cups, and see that the stem is a straight line, the cup is the head of the flower, and how the functions are different because of those two different forms.
Yes.
And then how that translates into other things, like straight lines being roads, and the nervous system and the vascular system and all this, and other places are like deposits, like the brain and the heart. And it would have been an amazing time in school, right, to get your foot in the door of an understanding like that and get a kind of a key to more balance for the rest of your life.
Yeah, and it's funny, I had some experience with that with my oldest daughter. She was having trouble at school, and so they thought, oh, maybe it's because she's a bit too bright and energized, so they sent her to a special school for a week. And what that school was based in is they allowed the child to explore and learn what it was they were really caught by and really interested in. And I remember, I've still got it tucked away in a special drawer. She spent the whole week producing this lovely little book with illustrations and diagrams all about how the eyeball worked. Because for some reason, and she would have only been about 9 or 10, but for some reason, her inquiry, the questions she had that particular week, how do eyes work? How do we see? What is that all about? So she was given the tools and the encouragement and the support to explore that till she was satisfied that she had a 10-year-old understanding about it. So, when we talk about education and learning things at school, even that principle that, because it's entirely natural to be forced to learn something you're not naturally interested in, is the worst kind of educational experience. So this thing of allowing a human, because they're all different, to have because there's a polarity or a duality, isn't there? We have questions and we have answers. And you can have a burning question and a desire. And once you find the answer, that's then neutralized. You're satisfied till the next question comes up. So that's a very powerful motivator and a driver. And it's important to have those balances.
Yeah, absolutely. And, especially if the idea that there are certain laws and principles behind everything, like this law of polarities, this would be an amazing transformation for the education and for the child as well, because what's happened is everything's become fragmented into millions of pieces, right? So even the simple law of the two facets of positive and negative in relation to things, it's got so many names, symmetry and duality and polarities and all this. And so a person can get specialist in one area, and you can even study the eyes, but we've got two eyes, right? And that each one facilitates vision for either hemisphere of the brain. And so if there was a road back to these central laws, when we go into studying geometry and mathematics and chemistry and all these apparently separate subjects, because you go into a different classroom, different set of subjects, different subject, different ideas. But if you knew that there were certain laws behind it all, not only would that help you understand what you're studying, but it would also give a kind of mental stability and a mental versatility that you don't get when you study one specialized thing. Because if you become very specialized at one thing, apparently now you're not so clever in all the other thousands of areas of life. And I don't think that's a natural way to be.
No. And see, that's the thing too, that you talk about this being a law. And I think, sometimes it's not easy to see that, because even that very concept is opposite to how we're educated, which is mostly about given facts and information and we remember that, and then we repeat that back for the exam and we get a pass. So when you say positive and negative, a question, it's a pitching, directing sort of thing. And when you get a real intense inquiry, you can't stop thinking about it until you have the answer. And it's similar for the mind, it's similar when the body is hungry and needs food, it will drive and cause a motivation to get the food, and then it's balanced. So the point I was trying to make before was that when an education system set up where you're given all the answers and the knowledge that the government and the school thinks the society needs for that particular time, it's almost like a force feeding, because of the simple law, unless there's a question and inquiry in the first, but it's not like not having a stomach for the food to go into. And this is why when things are set up on inquiry-based learning, they're incredibly effective. And I've seen cases where children in the normal system are considered not to be very bright or a bit slow or have learning difficulties. When they're put in a situation where they can pursue what they're naturally wanting to find out, they just flourish. They do so because it's a natural built-in system with the human and everything else.
So you said you had a few examples of this law of polarity to kind of get us thinking in the area, get us kind of aware of some.
Yes, and one of the most obvious ones, which is more well known about today than when we were younger and at school, is the idea of the body and the mind, or the brain and emotional intelligence. It was never taken into consideration before. Body and mind, brain and emotions. One that's existed throughout all ancient cultures and civilizations is this idea of the earth and the sky being two polarities. It's even in Genesis, I think, the idea of the heavens and the firmament. That wasn't, that's an esoteric understanding where it's not talking literally about the earth and the heavens. It's talking about this polarity of energy force and power and its manifestation as matter. There's another good example. In the beginning, there was something, and out of that arose energy and matter, which the entire universe is constructed out of. Past and future. I mean, right now we're in the present, but already 10 minutes of our conversation is now in the past, and we can't change it, can we? Might be able to edit it slightly, but the content of it is there, and what will transpire in the rest of this conversation is still in the future. It hasn't manifested yet. This idea of the right brain and the left brain, the two hemispheres. Now, I know that more modern research shows it's not quite divided by that. There's multi-processes going on and they cross both hemispheres, but even at the physical level, this side of our brain controls this side of our body and vice versa. So even the way our human system works, you've got this polarity, you've got two things interacting and working together to make a third result. And, it's still, no matter whereabouts it's exactly located in the brain, there is an emotional part to our thinking, and there is an intellectual part to it. There's a creative, there's another example, artistic and scientific, or creative and methodical. And, this is one of the things we see in the world, that you can get a division between these two things, because in the past, I mean, Egypt's a good example. Science and art were synthesized into the one thing. I mean, those incredible sculptures and the pyramids and the things they constructed, highly scientific to a level we don't even understand how on earth they did it today, but highly aesthetic and artistic, both polarities and opposites combined in the one thing. So yeah, there's just a few examples to sort of set the tone and connect people to that whole incredible realm of what these polarities are and how they affect us.
Yeah, good, great to kind of warm into it, and the idea really is that behind everything, coming out from everything, is this central law of polarities. It can also be called opposites, can't it? It can be called opposites because that's how they appear to be.
Yes.
But in reality, most things are working together, or they're on a scale. So we say hot and cold as an example, but there's a scale, isn't there? Suddenly you tip over into cold, and suddenly you tip over into warm. There's the scale of temperature. So even though we say opposites, they're really, like you said about the hemispheres, they work together. Something about the word opposite kind of leads to the idea of opposition, doesn't it? This has caused a lot of problems throughout human history, because they have fallen into opposition, and a lot of polarities, poles, end up in conflict, rather than understanding that there's something to be said from both, or something to be done, or some function that's vital from both angles. So yeah, it's to chase down that core perception and stay with it long enough that later you then look out from it and you start seeing it everywhere. One of the first things I found I had, when I presented this subject here in Brazil, is to clarify the word negative, because when you talk about polarities, you say
yes.
positive, negative. Of course, you're talking about energy and the aura and force. When people hear the word negative, what do they think? They think you're talking about something bad, right? So it's quite unfortunate that the same word, negative, has these two different connotations. One is to do with, negative result, like, you failed, or a negative energy, something bad. But in the context of polarities, it's talking about the receptive, the passive, the receiving, the softening, the slowing down polarity one way or another. And that is absolutely as essential as the positive polarity. There's no superiority between either of these two poles.
Yeah. Very good point, because in a world where, so much is plastic and artificial, one of the things that I love about these sorts of laws is that humans didn't create them. They've been there since the beginning of the universe, let alone the beginning of time. And, you think of when you're awake and you're vertical and you're getting around doing things. And then when you go to sleep, unless you're a horse or a bat hanging upside down, you go into this horizontal position, but it's two completely different states. And you would put negative state with a sleep because that's when the body heals and energizes itself. I just came across an interesting thing the other day where Francis Crick, of the famous Watson and Crick duo, team of two, there's another whole thing about discoveries made by two people working together. For the rest of his life, he was really fascinated in studying the brain. And a few years ago, he published a paper from his research results, which stated that when we're asleep, what the brain does is it empties out all the rubbish and all the unuseful information and experience it's collected during the day. Whereas when you're vertical, it's doing the opposite, isn't it? It's gathering, it's bringing in, it's experiencing, and then there's a process when you go into that horizontal state. So there's a positive and a negative state. And as you say, it doesn't have that connotation on it. And of course, you talk about hot and cold. If you're in the desert and it's hot, a cold bath would be nice. But if you're up in Norway, where they have all that thermal activity, they have all these hot geothermal pools because when you're in a cold environment, it's nice to get into it to warm up. So positive or negative which is also a polarity, totally relevant and applicable to the particular situation and what's needed.
Yeah, one of the things I find striking in this subject is almost all the religious symbols, whether you're talking about a cross, or you're talking about the seal of Solomon, the Star of David, or you're talking about the Yin-Yang symbol, have these two polarities in them. But again, that other description, other terminology, other names, so we don't look and immediately see. But the cross was used by the American Indians, by the Celts, by different peoples around the planet. And it very simply shows the vertical vector, which is the positive bar, and the horizontal vector, which, as you say, when we sleep, we're forced to comply with the law.
Yes.
We literally close off, because that's an example, isn't it? Open and close. So we literally close off, we go into the slowed down negative state of the horizontal bar. But the Star of David also is showing two triangles.
Yes.
Locked into each other, and how that's a particular aspect of this law, right? Because you have growth and you have decomposition. It's part of how nature works. And again, if we understood that, maybe we would get some more natural balance to do with being able to let things go, to be able to shed things, to drop things, because it's part of the falling away, of life. But one of the ones that's most fascinating is the Yin-Yang symbol, because what I love about the Yin-Yang symbol is that two things. One is that it's showing something in movement. It's just a static moment. When you see a picture, it's a static moment. But the other thing is the dot inside each of the areas, because inside the black area, there's a white dot, and inside the white, there's a black dot. And there's different levels to that understanding. But one of them is that you do get the other polarity inside what seems to be the one polarity. So as an example, the mouth it seems like a receptive polarity because you put food and drink and, we take in through the mouth. But inside that polarity, you would say the black, the negative polarity, you got the tongue. And as the Maori knows of the New Zealand, they use the tongue in the haka, right? They put the tongue out. And of course, we communicate, we talk, and the tongue's very active inside that otherwise passive polarity. And this is where one of the things, there can be a confusion when you start trying to understand polarities. You think, well, how come if it's negative, it's got this positive bit inside it? Let's say the palm of the hand, in terms of shape, it's a negative polarity because it's receptive, it holds, the shape of it is more roundish compared to the fingers, which they go to grab and they point and they they're the more flexible, active, dynamic part. And the quantity of them compared to the singular palm is also a clue.
Yeah.
But inside the palm, inside that negative polarity, you got the lines.
Yeah.
So there's always things within things, it makes it just that much more fascinating, but can be confusing, but helps to understand why things are not easy to totally classify and leave at that point. There's often another nuance inside.
And it's such an important point because, as you mentioned before about the idea of that's attached to polarities of this law of duality is opposites, and it's not really accurate because the yin and yang symbol, you have one within the other. So you talk about hands, but you have a left hand and a negative hand, and in this work and in the study we do, one of the things a person soon learns is that to do with human energy process, they have their own polarities. So you have a negative polarity and a positive polarity. So they're more obviously our hand, because the human is an energized system, therefore more than just picking up bits of fruit and banging nails in with a hammer. They have a whole other level of purpose. And that's often why it's used in symbology with the two hands, because the word I meant to put in that's better than opposite is adjacent. It's two things adjacent to each other or working in conjunction. They're not really opposite, and that's why there's been so much conflict and trouble in history, where people see, and you mentioned religion, they see the way the creative powers manifest in the world as two different complementary natures, and a lot of people say this is the true way, and you're not, we'll kill you, and vice versa, and you get war and conflict. So it's also really important to have a deeper understanding about these polarities, to be able to work things out, and to all arguments and disagreements come out of two different points of view. And we've all had that experience, especially in relationships, where when you actually have a discussion and go back and forth, you start to see the truth of how it's just two different points of view. The actual issue or principle at play, both people actually agree upon once you get there. So this power of polarity, it has a very powerful effect on us, and if we're not careful, it can make us see things in very simple black and white issues, and unfortunately we're often encouraged to think that way for the purposes of other people, and to divide us into being into conflict, when really at the heart of the matter, it's just two different appreciations, or something appearing in two different ways, that at the heart of it is actually the same thing.
Yeah, and it's easy to kind of get fixated on a particular polarity, because if you have a success with that polarity, or if you saw that, let's say a person learns that I need to be tough, I need to be hard to survive in this world.
Yes.
Right, which is most of us have that moment, some point or another, where you think, God, to get by in this world, you got to be tough. And even people will say it like, if you want to be tough to survive in this world. And it's true. It's true. This is a problem without always remembering this law of polarities. It's true, but it's adjacent to another truth, which is there's an incredible softness that is so rich and so important and makes life worth living. What's the point if everything's just hard and crusty and brittle? What's the point? We're going to turn into a kind of Terminator future of hard shells, hard robots. The soft part of life makes things worth living. The hug, the tender thoughts, tender feelings, kindness. These things make it all worthwhile. So then you can flip. If you don't know that there's a key, like a pivot point between the two, which I would put the word appropriate with, the appropriateness of what's necessary in the situation. So sometimes we're going to be tough out in the world, but you come home, you want to be softer with your family. But if you have the perception that one particular polarity is right, then in certain situations, you're going to be smashing your head against, you're going to be using the wrong tool for the situation, let's say. Well, the opposite's true. Somebody's melted, they've been touched, they're soft, and they think this is the only way to be, is to be soft and loving and accepting, and, love solves everything. And it really, when we hear that, it is a truth. Just like there has to be a tough side to life, otherwise explain away the bone structure, firm and rigid. And
good example. Good example.
But if you're only soft and loving, and suddenly you encounter a situation where, well, I don't want to give an example because we see them every day in the news, but sometimes you've got to be tough.
Yep.
You've got to react. You've got to be firm,
Yep.
And if you're just sticking to the soft vector, now you've got trouble. And this is what causes contradiction in a person. The tough person thinks they need to be softer, but they're not sure how, because they've been having success being tough. And the soft person feels I need to toughen up, but I've told myself that this is the truth. So am I like forsaking this truth to go to this truth?
Yeah.
To this polarity to go to that polarity. And this is the beauty of the study. When you got the idea that the two are valid, you can start to look at things and get a harmonious balance between them. So sometimes it's important to be tough, sometimes soft. Sometimes we need to speak, sometimes we need to listen. Yes. Sometimes we need to move, sometimes we need to wait.
Yeah, very good, very good. And, when I was about 16, I joined a karate group, and we had a lovely, lovely instructor. He was from Japan. And at the end of the class, he always got us to do this little meditation process where he would get us to form a fist and then an open hand. And then we would bring the two together. And the idea of that was that you must have the hard, tough nature and the soft, kind nature. And, there's a lovely ceremony using the human body, which clearly works by both polarities in thousands of different ways, that right in front of you, you should be the master of both, not one of those being the master of you. So it's not like this knowledge hasn't been known in history, but, you get back to the original point. Should we have been taught this in school? Obviously, I'm biased, but yeah, I think so. I don't see how you could go wrong with that, because, even in school, when you look at Tutankhamun's funerary mask and casque, and they had this elsewhere in Egypt, he has the crook, the cross, the crook, and the flail, and that was to do, at one level, that was to do with encouragement, which is the crook, the soft way, and the flail, which is, the roasting and being told off and being pushed to do better. Now, imagine the school system based on that. I mean, I've had children and nieces and nephews, being told by a teacher that you're useless and you'll never amount to anything. I mean, that's just all the whip. Where's the encouragement and taking the care to find what that person's natural inclination is? Not everybody's an academic. Not everybody's naturally, because some people are, they're very good. You can tell them everything and they'll remember and can repeat it for the exam. But I wasn't one of those, unfortunately.
Yeah, and you're talking about like the Hierophant or the Pharaoh being the third vector, having the wisdom to know, do I use left or right? Is it the positive or is it the negative polarity?
Yeah.
And it can come down to very interesting basic things. I remember presenting this idea once in a lecture in New Zealand about the hands having polarities that you mentioned earlier. And it's confusing because if you pick up the Tao books, like Tao healing, Tao will say that the positive hand is the right hand. Okay. But those books were written by men, for men. Right. Think how the ladies are being treated, unfortunately, over this. Well, unfortunately, is a weak word for it. It's been a devastating imbalance. Talk about imbalances of the polarities over the last several thousand years. So the book was written by men, for men, And they're saying the right hand is the positive hand. Yeah, but in the ladies, it's the other hand. So I remember in a lecture once pointing this out, and a particular lady came up at the end, very nice lady who'd been coming along to a few lectures. And she said, so when you sleep with your, like I've been married for 20 years and I sleep on a certain side of my husband. So two poles are meeting, right? Because either the two left poles are meeting or the two right poles are meeting. Because if she's sleeping on her husband's right side, his right hand is meeting with her left hand. That's two positive poles, or the other side. Now she said, I'm sleeping on my husband's left side, which means the two negative poles are meeting.
Right.
And some people are like this too. You know, when you meet some people and you get a charge, you know, and the polarity seems to spin the conversation into a takeoff. Other people you meet is just kind of neutral. It's kind of like, yeah. And other people you meet and it kind of flattens off and you just can't get the conversation sparking. It's like wet, like trying to light a fire in the damp, you know. And she said, we've been sleeping like this for about 10 years and things have been a little bit quiet in the bedroom department. Do you know what I mean? She gives me a wink. And I said, she said, shall we swap sides? And I said, yeah, I think you should just experiment with it. Just try swapping sides. You might see what happens. Well, she came back a month later. She walked straight in through the door, straight up to me, pumped my hand. Thank you, teacher. What? I'd already forgotten what it was about. She said, no, I got my hand. It was very hard because it's very rigid. This is an interesting thing too about rigidity and softness.
Yes, yes.
It's very rigid, but finally we swapped sides, and it's been a marvelous month. I just wanted to thank you for saving the marriage.
Yeah.
So it's funny, it's apparently simple, but just actually being on the correct side of a person can make a big difference. Now, take that one example and think of a therapist teaching, well, not teaching in the case of therapy, but helping, counseling, somebody who's got depression, but they're meeting negative to negative. So you're causing that downward spiral of energy. Or the person suffers anxiety and you happen to place the seats positive to positive. So now you've got a building energy rather than a quietening effect. Yeah. So again, there's no one rule fits all. It really depends on the circumstance, but knowing this, you know, can really change the balances in relationships dramatically.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, you know, it's such a potent little example because, you know, as we talked about at the start, well, you know, can the knowledge of this change your life? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, I know in my own life growing up, being an artistic, creative type and a bit sensitive, I think intuitively I knew this because I got into martial arts and learned boxing and all that sort of stuff. And although I went to art school, I left after a year or so. I didn't find that very, very inspiring. And I went and got a job as like a construction worker to try and I'm so glad that I did, because having the balance of both of those, because that's the other thing, you don't have to be stuck. Normally, society does that. It'll put people in a specific, you know, it'll put people in a box. Oh, you have your creative types, and you have your engineers. You know, you have your emotional types, you have your intellectual types, but the greatest results are always out of the interaction between those two, because they cannot see the full picture or solution separated in those polarities. There has to be an interchange. And, you know, there's a German philosopher in the 1600s called Friedrich Hegel, and he came up with, they refer to his philosophy as the Hegelian Dialectic. And really, he didn't really discover it because it's been around since the beginning of humans, but he formulated this idea that the whole of history, the whole formation and development of civilizations and wars and all the rest of it came down to these two things, which he called thesis and antithesis. So thesis is an action, it's a positive, it's something put forward. And then the antithesis is what would naturally oppose that and disagree with it, and you know, because you're looking at apparent opposites. And really the third thing he put with that was, his term was synthesis. You have thesis and antithesis, but it's resolved by synthesis. And in philosophical terms, this was like a working model that you could study two different religions or two different philosophies or two different, ways of capitalism and communism, for example, that you're constantly getting this interaction and this conflict, but the resolution and the way to go forward is always to seek what are the common elements, because capitalism and communism, you're really just looking at a way to organize and run an economy so people can have food and water and all the rest of it. It's the end result that's the important thing. So, we've had a history of this dynamic interchange, but that's natural. That you will, because of polarities, you will always get the interchange. So people can be put off by the conflict or see that that's all there is. That history is the history of conflict. No, it's not. You have to dig a little bit deeper, because unfortunately history, as Winston Churchill famously said, history is written by the victors. So all of those wars and all those conflicts, whoever wins then writes the historical account of how that happened. And unfortunately, you lose that third bit that's actually come out of the interaction.
Yeah, absolutely. So, again, what are we saying? We're saying that, there's two polarities, these two polarities, and this third vector that you're hinting at there, Darren, behind everything. And we don't go in search of it. We don't get enough examples of it to really get that matrix moment, when Neo suddenly under the matrix, he's seeing
sees it everywhere. Yeah.
This is the amazing thing about the subject. It's like a coding, it's like a computer programming behind everything. So once you get it, and it's not complicated. It's only the law of polarities. It's only two things. It's not like, you have to understand 747 dynamics. It's just two, but it's because in a way it's so simple, because it's at the core, but it manifests in so many different ways.
Yes.
That it's easy to get sort of spun off from that core into one of the expressions of it. And so it's really persisting at the core. And one way to do it is to get like a notebook and just keep getting examples, but try to see, is this a positive polarity or a negative polarity? What's going on here? And what's the function of each thing? You get the idea of filling up and emptying out. Such a simple thing, right? Full and empty. But most relationships are broken up. Most crimes are committed because a person fills up on a positive polarity to the point that because they haven't emptied in a safe way, there's a tipping point. They've been filling up, now they're tipping out, and they express it in anger or explosion or attack, but it's been filling up quietly in the background. I mean, things just don't appear. Things have been building up. So they've been catching a certain force, certain irritation, and then there's a moment it snaps over into an expression. And when it snaps over, it comes out with the full force of what's been building up. So you get a tipping point.
Yes.
And then suddenly a person's doing something crazy or saying something rude or attacking somebody that was not expecting it because they didn't know this thing was building up in the background. And it's just a very, very simple example, full or empty. What are you getting full of? We know the feeling. We're suddenly get full of an irritation. We get full of a sense of injustice or something. And if it gets too filled up and there's no way to empty it out or balance it, people can do crazy things.
Yeah. I remember I had one, there were a few, but even at primary school, I had a very clever teacher that, particularly in the summer, because you're sitting in there trying to learn all this stuff and it's a lovely day and there's the green football field out there. A couple of times a day, if she saw us getting all frustrated and filled with frustration, she would give us a 10-minute break and let us just run around on the field like crazy kids do. Let that out, come back, and then we were more empty to be filled up again. It's this natural tick-tock, positive, negative process. And it's even in our talk about natural and something having put it in there right from the beginning. We have these two polarities of our nervous system. We have the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. So the sympathetic nervous system is involved in the flight or fight syndrome. That's where danger, your adrenaline glands kick in, and this is where, a person can jump over a 10-foot wall that they couldn't normally do, where you have that, you can fight or get out of a burning building or something. You don't even realize how you did it afterwards. That's very positive, very active, and boom, it switches on in a split second. And then the parasympathetic nervous system, that's the one that kicks in when we relax, we're listening to soft music, we're being creative, we're sort of meditating, and you're constantly switching between the two. Now, what's really interesting about that is, I don't think anyone would argue, and it goes back to what you were saying about hard and soft. I mean, this is why there are those two natures that's built in to the human system. What's really, really interesting is that both the flight or fight syndrome and the relaxed, balanced syndrome are actually mostly based in our primitive parts of our brain. So animals have that as well, right? They're relaxed and busy eating grass. When the tiger comes and they all take off. What's really, really interesting is that the part of us that can decide whether one or the other is appropriate, as is the word you put with it, is actually the cerebral cortex. It's the higher, more evolved part of our brain where our active waking consciousness is based, that we can decide one or the other. And, and there's a great clue, because it's not easy to go into that conscious part of your brain. So much of what we do is habitual, like driving the car and operating the keyboard and all of those, so much of it. And so this is another way that people kind of get trapped in these polarities, and something's negative or positive or bad or good, because often a person will favor one or the other. You get these active, my young son had a friend, and we used to call him whack it with a stick Nathan, because you'd go for a walk to the beach and you'd be enjoying the sea air and looking at crabs, but he'd grab a bit of wood and he'd just run around whacking everything. I remember once we went on holiday and we took him with us. He couldn't swim, but there was a swimming pool there, and it had a length and it had a width. He was just able to dive in and thrash around till he got to the other side of the pool. I mean, we thought he was going to drown, but he just went at it and at it and at it all weekend. By the time he was finished, he could swim the full length of the pool. I mean, that's that other side of the system and the nature. Just go at it, go at it, go at it. But of course, the poor boy had trouble concentrating at school. He had trouble sitting down to study or even eat his dinner because this other nature. So, even in parenting, it's very, very important to have that kind of knowledge so you can help your children balance, those two natures of themselves.
Absolutely. And wouldn't it be amazing if we could look at the qualities, the human qualities, in terms of the polarities? Because again, this is where you can trip up, because if you've got, let's say you've got a mother or father that really emphasize patience, you have to be patient. Patience is a wonderful quality, amazing quality, but it's obviously on the negative incline, right? In the sense of wait and passive, and and people have difficulty being patient today because the whole world, the whole culture has been speeding up. So it's definitely, the whole world is inclined to the positive polarity, which is part of this conversation as well. But let's say you've filled up so much from patience, and you've emphasized patience as the kind of most important thing to always be, that when opportunity appears, when moments appear that you should act, you should leap, you should jump.
Yeah, right. Yes.
You can't react. You can't, you're suddenly too passive. And the opposite's also true, like the story of, what was it? Whack him with a stick.
Whack him with a stick, Nathan, yeah.
So, you get the person who's like enthusiastic, right? But if you're always, which is a positive polarity thing, clearly, but if you're always enthusiastic, how do you calm down? How do you evaluate whether something's worth being enthusiastic about without looking calmly at it? So all the qualities can really fall into one polarity or another. And if you have a success with a certain quality, let's say you're very confident and you talk and other people pay attention. So you fix in your mind, right, that's the way to be the talker, to be the explainer, but there's another situation you should really, it's appropriate just to listen, to be quiet, to be still, but you can't switch it off. No. Because this is what you've told yourself is the winning way, or the world has told you is the winning way. And we like to do it with others. We like to say, oh, this guy talks, this guy's really, another classic one is, this is a really funny guy, or this guy's really serious, or this girl's really serious, or she's really funny. And you kind of fix into a funny guy or funny gal role. And that's the polarity compared to the serious thing. And I don't think it's a coincidence or just by chance that so many comedians end up falling into deep depression.
I was just going to say that, yeah, absolutely.
Also because they've loaded so much one pole that they flip at some point and suffer a major crash. And again, so there's a balance. You can't always be joking and funny, and you shouldn't always be heavy and serious, clearly.
Oh, and look, and I can totally relate to that, because I could be a funny guy. I have a reputation as a funny guy at work and all the rest of it. But I know when I've been in situations like an awkward in-law family dinner or whatever, not that it's always like that, but I go into this thing of like trying to be extra funny and it's draining. It's so exhausting. But luckily I know, because of this law, I have other activities that I can go into afterwards, or even go outside and just look at the night sky and the trees and fill up again on something and go back. But if that's your whole life and your career is constantly, because that's what you're doing, you're energizing, you're using your energy to make other people laugh and feel good. And it's a common factor for comedians and entertainers that they end up drained and then fill up, they've lost their energy, because you can only be empty or full. You fill up on something that's not healthy for you. Self-doubt and depression and confusion and contradiction and all the rest of it. And there's a good example. I mean, I'm sure that there are comedian schools you can go to and learn how to be a better comedian. Is that on the curriculum to advise people on how to keep the balance so that they don't burn out and destroy themselves later on? Because clearly by the results there doesn't seem to be.
Yeah, and again, touting one polarity success, because everybody sees, wow, it's a great moment when you're the funny guy or funny girl and everybody's reacting. You think, well, I want to be like that. But just in that one decision, by going into one polarity, you could have caused a major imbalance in your system. Yeah. And again, when somebody walks into a doctor's office or a psychologist's office, the role of the doctor and the role of the psychologist is to see where the person is out of balance. Right. So, there's no escaping it. They start measuring and checking things and checking if in case of psychology, is there a balanced reaction when you bring up the family or the mother or the father,
Poking the minefield, yeah.
Yeah, you're poking the minefield to see if something explodes, because it's loaded with something or other. But I also thought to mention, one of the earliest references we have that all the alchemists got into, which were the emerald tablets of Hermes Trismegistus, that they say was the Greek equivalent to Thoth, the god, Egyptian god Thoth. And one of the things about those emerald tablets is they talk about the law of polarities, particularly the one that everybody knows, which comes from there, which is as above, so below. As above, so below. But although we're, again, like this law of polarities, although we've heard it, what does that actually mean? What does it mean as above, so below? Yeah. And the other thing that they talk about is the father sun, and they talk about the feminine nature of the moon. And that ties in with the first statement, because what they're saying with as above, so below, not that they thank God there's not like tax laws up in the star belts, but thank goodness, doesn't apply to everything. But what they're saying is the same laws that make the cosmos run that are in operation in the cosmos are here on the planet, are here in our bodies, are here in our minds, the same laws. It's quite amazing. So you've got the positive polarity of the sun, and you've got, they're seeing this, the moon as a negative polarity in the sense that it's totally receptive still. It's still building up its oxygen supply and atmosphere, its water supply. And they're seeing the planet, in this case, as a kind of meeting point for those two, although the Earth is definitely inclined to a negative polarity still at the moment. So when we study this, we're studying the kind of language of the cosmos, the language of the universe. Totally. And it's beautiful to extend the sentiment out to, I'm trying to understand how the whole universe works here.
You know, a really good example of this very simple but powerful law behind all things is that, you know, that we can only have this conversation because it's being done through a computer and we have a screen, but at the very heart of that central processing unit, you've got a code working on a binary code, on, off, you know, dash, dot, dash, dash, zero. So you think of the complexity of everything we do with computers, but at the very heart of it, it all comes down to just this binary code. You know, and there's some really interesting modern science coming out where they see that even at the level of atoms and the whole of the universe, there's some kind of binary code or information that all of that hangs around and is powered by. It comes down to this thing about polarity, just two simple powers, simple cosmic powers at play that everything else manifests out of.
It really is amazing. It's amazing. Now, I read something incredible to do with the two hemispheres of the brain. There's a particular mental problem or brain problem called aphasia, and that is when a person can't use language. They have difficulty with language construction, and that's because they've had a stroke in the left hemisphere.
Right, yes,
which is inclined to have it. You know, this is the logical, organizing, classifying side compared to the artistic, creative, holistic side of the right hemisphere. But what's interesting about the state, aphasia, is that a person can still speak sentences if they sing the sentences.
Oh, wow.
So they can, because they're activating the right hemisphere of the brain,
amazing.
They can sing a sentence, but they can't just read it in a normal way coming out from the left side of the brain. And another example is when somebody looks at color, because sometimes they're still arguing over this hemisphere thing because they seem to interconnect and cross over at certain points, which is, of course, natural. But when a person recognizes a color, let's say color, because you would think it's a right hemisphere thing, but they argue, well, there can't be anything with hemispheres, because when a person looks at color and they recognize a color, the left hemisphere is being activated.
Right.
But now they've found that when children are discovering color, the right hemisphere is active.
Wow.
So what that says is that's the key to get back the magic in your life, actually, because what it says is when you see things afresh and you see them in a kind of holistic way, the right side of the brain is active, and you can see things in a kind of more global, spherical sort of way, the integrated aspect of that thing. Later, it becomes classified, which is also important. It's an important function to be able to have those stepping stones and reference points. But it goes into more of a flat, organized, structural thing, like we've done with society. You know, we've kind of organized everything. But a lot of people, I mean, depression's through the roof and suicides because they lose the magic of life. They can't see a flower because when they see a flower, they immediately think simply flower, yellow flower. Yeah. And if you're clever, you have the name of this, you have the name of the species. But the other side, the right side of the brain, that right hemisphere, is going to look and going to sense the mystery, the magic, the wonder of the flower. We see it as children are learning. They come in with that, wow, everything's amazing. So it's again, what's appropriate. Sometimes we do just simply need to organize things. Other times to be able to open up the windows, like we open up the windows for fresh air, activate the other side of the brain, and singing, contemplating, letting your mind expand into the bigger picture of things, music. This is dance, but again, not organized dance, because then you flip over into a kind of classification, and then you start losing the flavor. But some freedom inside that dancing or music or singing, and the magic of life keeps swinging through those two polarities.
That's it's one of the things I love about the Ruby Mountain course and lessons and practical examples you go through, because it has so many ways of helping to balance the two polarities, because really you can't get that deeper perception and sort of detached awareness where everything seems new and miraculous once again, like when you're a child, unless those two polarities are balanced in ourselves. So it's not impossible. It's, again, just simple techniques that once you know about them, you can apply it. And I think most people would love to have more of that magical awareness and appreciation and wonder that we had when we were children.
Yeah, absolutely.
We were naturally based in that part of ourselves before it all became habitual.
But it's an odd conversation, isn't it, Darren? Because we're kind of in and out and round about the one thing. The one thing is this law of polarities or duality or symmetry. But it's hard to stay near it, because it goes off into the thousands of things that life is. But to get that point, to get that idea kind of rooted in like a plant or a tree root, it just gives an amazing mental freedom and a mental stability at exactly the same time. The stability and the flexibility, which again, the law of polarities. So we've got to invite people to subscribe once again.
Yes. Subscribe.
And thank people for watching. We're happy to see people are coming along and enjoying the videos.
Yeah, great. That was that was an amazing journey. We must have touched on 1,000 different things, but again, that is the nature of this law. It because it's in everything, and it's almost like going out and collecting berries off trees or little shiny, you walk along the beach and you find those lovely little bits of glass that have been ground smooth, or a curious shell. The more you collect in your little special box, the more you begin to see it, and the more it energizes you, and the more it's easier to locate in that part of yourself where everything's a miracle, really incredible, that we even exist. It's stunning.
And I got a bit of advice when I first came across this. The harder the example to find, the more value, the more rich, the more you will appreciate it. So it's there in everything. Sometimes you just got to persist a little bit to get it. Once you've got it, can really be like you're just saying, finding a little treasure that starts to explain life directly between you and life, rather than reading it in a book.
That's the point. What a good point. What a good point to close with. Very good.
Darren, great to talk, and we'll see you again soon.
Yeah, great. Thank you for today. Been really, really amazing.
All right. Bye now. See you next time.
Bye. See ya.